I've gone with a bit of a theme today, Gaz, and that is largely around post-match interviews and what players and coaches might be alluding to a little bit, because I think you can pick a lot up from it. The first one was after Geelong's win against West Coast, a much improved performance from West Coast, but Geelong, I thought, looked a little bit flat, and Joel spoke about a heavy training block after the game.
You know, I wouldn't say today we got perfect. We did train a little bit different. We trained heavy. We've got a big month coming up, so there's a little bit of planning towards that, but also staying in the moment.
Now, that actually sounds like it's heavy training block, like in a month training block, but I reckon they just trained heavy over the bye, and you'll see sides be flat from that for 1 week, but then they'll pop even the next week. So I think Geelong, and Chris Scott spoke about it as well, that it's not abnormal.
Right. I'm glad you brought this up. So I've heard this spoken about a lot in my time. It's real, is it?
Heavy training blocks?
Yeah.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
Right.
Periodisation through a season, yes.
Yeah. So, a team will have a flat performance or whatever, and, the word will go around, during a heavy training phase. And we all used to get But you reckon that can be responsible for performances that are a bit subpar?
Well, I thought Tom Hawkins in particular looked listless,
Right.
really. He kicked 3 goals too, but his contest with Barras was
But surely they wouldn't be
fascinating.
giving him a heavy. He's 30. How old is he? You wouldn't be giving him a heavy training block, would you?
Well, heavy training. It's not like they're running 400s.
Okay, so explain. All right,
It might be an extra 25.
So there's a good
30%
point.
of load.
Tell us, because we're not in it, right? So tell us what a heavy training block is.
Well, you might actually end up doing. So in a normal 7-day break, you might get at intensity, because it's all about recovery in season. You might get at intensity in a normal 7-day break for potentially a couple of run-throughs and maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes of scrimmage in a week.
Well, is that enough to be a determinant on a performance on a weekend?
No, that's normal. So to actually because it's all about recovery. So you're emptying out on the weekend and you're really recovering for most of the week.
Yep.
And periodically you might be spiking in a main training session. As I said, it might be for 3 or 4 sprint efforts, top end, and maybe 10 or 15 minutes of match scrimmage, for instance.
So what's heavy then?
Heavy might be that you actually take the opportunity with the weekend off, and you might actually put a match block in where you're trying to replicate the load and intensity of a match.
Yep. For how long?
And then backing up 2 or 3 days later and doing another 45 to minutes to an hour of really intense work, or you're doing top end sprints at for 15, 20 efforts, let alone just for 3 or 4. So it actually has an effect on the body in the short term detrimentally, but then in a couple of weeks and long term, you're trying to put a little bit more of a training.
No, that's good. That gives some perspective around it. So it's a real thing, and it's a heavier little load of training, and as a result, you might get a flat performance, which is where the Cats are at.
Number 2, I digress about the first theme. I'll come back to that, but I wanted to highlight Isaac Rankin, and I just loved his performance yesterday.
Surprised that wasn't Coxie.
Well, so am I. Rankin and Ainsworth, 2 players that just are getting it done. When you look at high-performing or teams that are in form, quite often their high forwards are the ones that are doing a lot of impact. Yes, we set up defensively, and yes, the midfields and maybe the tall forwards. But when sides are performing well, have a look at how well their high forwards are going. Now, Ainsworth is having a sneaky great season, up and back. But the thing I loved about Rankin, he's an expressive, creative type, but he must be getting coached really well, because you can see he's starting to enjoy sharing his work with his teammates and putting and letting them get the glory. And that's a really it's a scary prospect, because if he continues with that creativity and he becomes a great team player as well, that's a good sign for Gold Coast.
Because that hasn't always been the case. Isaac Rankin has attracted criticism for lack of work rate and lack of seemingly wanting to celebrate and be a part of the team. He's had individual moments of sheer brilliance, but that's a good sign.
Well, if you can cop a whack for that,
And come back.
then you should be able to get a pat on the back for when it turns.
Feedback as we go along. Always excuses with Geelong. Virus says you are so gullible. That's Tom. So Tom knows more than the coach who's been there for 10 years and just out of the game. He knows more than you, so that's good. Next.
Next is Ken Hinkley and his post-match audio, and I reckon coaches in particular sit on this when they love a particular player and they've backed a particular player and they come through and they play well.
If he's being directed that at me, I've been critical of Marshall. Not him personally about the way Ken Hinkley's played him, and in particular the way that they tried to protect him against the Melbourne backline that was at its absolute peak earlier in the year, where he wouldn't allow Marshall to play on May or Lever.
I didn't realise I was hitting a raw nerve here.
No, that may not be me. I don't know. I've always been supportive of Marshall, the player.
I think I heard Gary.
I've been critical of Marshall not being played in the key post, and he has in recent weeks been really good.
And I think that sometimes it takes players a little bit longer to come to hand, and the coach and the internal staff, well, obviously people internally will see the good in some players before everyone else does, and before they actually pop out the surface and start performing consistently. So I get the sense that Todd Marshall was one of those players for Ken Hinkley and for Port Adelaide, and he's had some breakout performances, but he's still yet to do it consistently.
Yeah, and that was my criticism. We've let him be that player. They tried to hide him. Well, they did on that occasion. Will Zalatoris in the rough, who's leading the US Open, tightened up in the USPGA, ended up as a runner-up, and is now just tightening up again, trying to win his first major. So we'll keep an eye on that.
Point being, as a coach, is you don't mind being able to tell people to eat humble pie when things go well, and I don't mind seeing and hearing that. Number 4, the Bulldogs. Luke Beveridge, after scoring 125 points in a high-scoring contest against GWS, came out with this in his post-match. So the Dogs gave up 105 points to GWS. It's only the third time this year that a team has scored 100 and lost. Richmond scored 100 points in their loss to Sydney, and Brisbane 112 points in their loss to Hawthorn, but I reckon Bevo would be wrapped with their offense. Like, they move the ball brilliantly. Their roll and go and their capacity to connect with their forwards, it looks like it's something that's been worked on over the bye. But yeah, typical of a coach that's looking for better to talk about the aspect of their game that they want improvement in.
Will that happen? They play Hawthorn this week. Now, Hawthorn are also a run and gun side, so it may happen again, but will it win you a final, that style of footy?
Run and gun? Well, it's won them a flag in 2016. So, I mean...
But 35 goals in a game.
I'd play in a shootout. Well, Blighty would say that, in 97, 98.
That was a long time ago.
As an aside, and we'll get to this later, but I think that we will get some really open, free-flowing football in the next month. I've seen coaching groups that have been prepared to put an extra player in their defence. Early in the season, we saw out of stoppage. We saw a heavy stoppage scoring because sides were prepared to hold 6 forwards and then trust 6 back. So there was a lot of 6-6-6, even in general play.
And that's a nightmare for some defenders that don't know how to defend.
Yeah, correct. And when you've had the support of an extra player there for so long, coaches were backing their defenders one-on-one, and some stood up and some haven't. And then there's ball use out of the back half. So Sydney put Callum Mills back about a month ago as a 7th, halfway through that game against Richmond, and it made a difference to not just their defence, but it got their offence going. We're seeing coaches put an extra behind, and I think we saw it a little bit with Bulldogs and GWS as well, and we're seeing bounce. So sides are going from back half to forward 50. Quickly, and then hitting the extra of the opposition, and it's coming back again. So I think we're in for some really high transitional play in the next month.
Lower scoring.
No, I think it'll be well.
If you got an extra back, is it going to make it harder to score?
No, I still think we're going to get a lot of end-to-end stuff, and then I think that means it's more open field play, and that should mean heavier scoring. Ironically,
well, it should if their ball use going inside 50 is at an AFL standard, when it's right now. For the vast majority of teams, it's that suburban standard.
I'm on notice. I'm on notice with this. I think the next month's going to be some really exciting footy, more open, expansive field play and ball use, which I think is going to make for better viewing. Last one I've got is Brett Ratton after St Kilda's lost to Essendon. Now, I'd focus on Essendon because they were really good and we've got to give them credit where it's due.
Yep.
But St Kilda's next month is interesting. They've got some real challenges ahead of them and they've just come off a loss that they weren't expecting and that they weren't happy with. They've got high expectations of themselves. They've been really consistent. They've exceeded most people's expectations in the first half of the year. But they play Sydney this week. Then they go Carlton, Freo, Western Bulldogs. So that's a big month. And they're coming off their worst performance of the year. So the coach is saying, no excuses for us. We've got to get it going. We've got to make sure that we're putting our best out in the park. And Saints fans are in for a very interesting ride over the next month because they need to make it happen now because you have a quiet month as close as it is. You have a quiet month, you could end up missing the big dances at the end of the home and away. I've got a question for you.
A question without notice?
Essendon, where did that come from? Why?
I'm going to have a good look at that tonight on the couch. They were just hard to play against, which is hard to play against, and then they got the ball moving. And when you get those two things going, you're going to be a really good chance. So, what an interesting game that was. They led by 28 points at half time. They kicked 5 goals in the first 10 minutes of the third quarter, they being St Kilda. And in my mind, I have no doubt they went, see, I told you we could beat Essendon. I knew we'd. So they had a pressure rating of 235 when they kicked those 5 goals, right?
Really?
So Rats has given it to, this is the way I read it. I might be wrong. They've half-time had some home truths read to them about the way they were, playing, their lack of hardness at the footy. They came out and did all the things that have St Kilda supporters excited about the year for. They kicked 5 goals on the bounce. Their pressure was through the roof. They asked the question of Essendon and then went, got their pipe out and said, how good are we going? Their pressure rating dropped to about 160.
I loved, Marcus Redmond is a young fella that I just love his hard-on-sleeve competitiveness. It was great to see him perform really well in a win. Yeah. And I think the younger guys really stood out for me. Obviously, Hind, who missed a lot of the first half of the year. Jones has played a few games back now, and he looks like he's going to be a player. Durham who runs up and down on the wing for them. I mean, we've got that D'Ambrosio who's obviously come in for his first game.
Not Marcus.
Massimo. Yeah, there's some really good Hobbs. I mean, the younger guys are the ones that are actually coming through.
Yep.
And that transition for them is going to be important. And as you just spoke about, trust your list. You need to trust your list, and you need to trust your youth. So it was a great sign. Happens very often coming off a bye when you get a chance to reset, draw the line. Can't do anything about our terrible front half of the year.
Yeah.
But we can draw the line on it. It gives you a chance to take a breather and put a real gap between what was and what might be. And I think that's why we see sides like Essendon come through. We see sides like West Coast put their best performance outside of the Collingwood game earlier in. We often see this. So potentially some of the performances, say a North or a West Coast or an Essendon, Hawthorn have been really strong. GWS, they can shape this challenge that we're talking about in that top 2/3 for who's going to finish in the top 8.
Will it be short-lived or not is the question.
Mason Redmond. Mason.
What do you call him?
I'm dead set got Alzheimer's.
What do you call him?
I call him Marcus or something.
You got a Marcus on the mind, on the brain at the moment.
That's categorically wrong.
You know what? These are things.
What's with Marcus?
These are things I know, but between my mind and my mouth, things get mixed up. And I'm turning 50 this year. I think it's happening. I apologise to you, Mason.
Right.
No good.
I'll accept your apology on his behalf. Braden Pruce has been reported for the 3rd time in 7 matches. A dangerous tackle on Grundy, into a strike on Monday, into a dangerous tackle on English. You're the coach of him. You say, come in, Braden, sit down. What do you say to him?
We love you. We love your aggression, and we love the way that you want to take the game up. And he's probably been encouraged, to be honest.
The 2 dangerous tackles were against his direct opponent, Grundy in the first instance and English in the next. So you know what he's trying to do.
Well, I love big fellas being big and playing aggressively. In any other environment, in any other era, what he's doing as a coach I want to see. I want to see him continue it. So if I'm sitting with him in front of me talking about what he's doing, I'm saying, look, I love it, mate. But this is not the era that we're in, and these are the rules, and we'd prefer to have you playing than not.
Yep.
And they're really hard conversations to have because, like, you'd actually want the rule to be different in many ways than it is. But if you're missing games because you're tackling aggressively, I hate that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like it, but you've got to understand the environment you're in, and you've got to modify your behaviour accordingly.
Yeah. Just we finished off on Jordan to go. We didn't finish off because we come up to the news. So, your expectation of the outcome. So Collingwood's board, which has strong female leaders on there as well, will be. I would imagine will have a fair bit to say on what happens from here.
Well, it's really strong. Like attitudes towards women. I mean, obviously the club with the Do Better report was about systemic racism and a history of that and addressing that. So there's been some really big conversations that have taken place in Collingwood over the last 12 months, 18 months.
Yeah.
And the board, there's been a changeover of leadership in terms of presidency over the last 2 or 3 years. So there are some really fundamental decisions and conversations that would be taking place. And we're not privy to all of them. And even in my role as senior coach, not privy to the board discussions. But the board itself are accountable and responsible for setting the agenda of how the club environment looks. And then it's the responsibility of the leadership, either in the administration or the football department, to carry that out.
So all of the decision to go, most of the behaviours, I go, well, okay, you let him go, so you've got to live with the fact that he's going to go and have a drink.
No, I don't like that. The let him go part, I don't agree with that.
Well, how did he get there?
Well, I'm sure Collingwood didn't.
Well, hang on, you reckon he was unaware of him and go on to?
No, they're not unaware because players need to declare their whereabouts for drug testing.
So they agreed to let him go.
They would have understood that he was going there. Yes,
that's what I'm saying. So they let him go. What don't you agree? What part of that don't you agree?
There's the club's responsibility isn't to stop people doing what they want to do.
You can't sit down with Jordan to go and say, right, here is our very, very strong recommendation to you, Jordan.
Absolutely, you could.
So I don't reckon they've done that.
How do you know?
Because all of the things I have read is that they have given them the right to make their decision and go wherever they want.
Yeah, and generally that's what adults are allowed to do. Adults do is they do what they want to do.
Then there's my point. The entitled behaviour.
Yes, it's
not. I will do what I want to do.
Yeah,
you want to be an AFL athlete. You want to be a professional athlete. You are responsible for your previous behaviours, which then impact on what you're able to do going forward.
Yeah, and that's as much as that's on Geordie, and he's still a young man that's working it out. But it's on Geordie. That's not on the Collingwood Footy Club.
That's your opinion.
It's what is on the Collingwood Football Club is what they accept and what they don't accept.
That's your opinion. You say don't put it on the Collingwood. My opinion is Collingwood takes some responsibility because they've put in a mechanism that's allowed him to go, right? Anyway, he's gone. And then of all the behaviours over there, the one of gravest concern is the one with the female. And I know, as I said, I don't know if it's his girlfriend or whatever the case is, but that is the behaviours that you will be seen to be accepting if there isn't some sort of recourse,
which comes to attitudes to women.
Right,
largely.
Exactly. So there lies his major problem.
Yes, and the flawed decision making to put yourself in that position again so quickly after the situation that he found himself over in New York is the real issue, and that would be for me the point of discussion when he's sitting in front of probably his teammates first and foremost, and Craig McRae and the coaching staff, and Graham Wright, and potentially above that. But so he would need to explain why he thought it was appropriate to put himself in that position again so soon.
Yeah, and then
at all,
what happens as a result of that will be interesting to see how Collingwood arrive at whatever penalty, if in fact there is one, that they hand out.
I find it we were talking about, I think you made the point around the young fella Fredericks. I'm not even going to have a
Yeah.
crack at the first name.
Michael, I think.
Frederick he drank on a 6-day break and he was suspended for a week.
Yep.
Now, and you put that up against this one and go, okay, does it speak to club expectations and values? The very clear one on the first one is that is a black and white issue. That is a professional standard which you are expected to execute, and it would be a black and white rule within the playing group around this is how you go about your professional expectations. The grey area in this one, if you just take it as a one-off issue, the grey area in this one is you're on a break, you're in your own time, you're away from club, you've got the you're not playing a game in 6 days' time. So it's nearly like, okay, well, you are on your own time. You are a little bit off radar, hopefully. How do you judge a personal decisions or personal choices when it's not actually about the professional playing footy or preparing for a game of football this week?
Yeah, but exposing
It adds
a female is not something that should have to be written down to explain to a group of young men what is acceptable and what's not.
I'm saying that it's bled out of now that reinforces it even further. It's bled out of professional standards and expectations, which are still there because I don't know whether I don't
Just
know.
'cause it's not written
I don't
down.
know how
It's
hard.
the AFL rule is you don't drink on a 7-day break. Yeah, okay, good. You broke it, therefore you're suspended. Just because it's not written that you shouldn't do this to a female.
No, I understand that, but you're going from a professional standard about what you need to do your job, which is to be a footballer, and you're now sort of talking about what personal and social standards should be. Nick Rewalt on the Thursday, I think it was, made a really good point in regards to the professional standards of it. Okay, so what's Lockie Neal doing? What are the more professional players? What's Andrew Brayshaw doing? What are those guys doing through the bye, through that extra time that they have to fill their cup? There's certain things that certain people will do, and
I don't take as much. I understand
the question
exactly
is
what Nick's
what
point is,
do you
but
do?
everyone in terms of how they prepare is different. I
Yes.
don't, for Jordan, without all this other stuff going on, saying,
Yeah.
I don't need to immerse myself into 10 days of hard training during my break to be as good as I can be. I go, good, fair enough. It's just what you do.
Well, what I would say is that if you want to get paid the big dollars,
Yeah.
you want to be reliable on and off the field.